Hey there, Wayne Defrancesco, and we're back with another swing analysis here on my website and on YouTube, if that's where you're watching. If you are, please go to the website, check it out. Lots of cool stuff coming up there. Probably recognize the swing, recognized as one of the all-time great golf swings. Steve Elkington, certainly one of the more fluid and balanced swings that you'll see. When people say, "Oh, that's he's got a perfect swing," or "That's a great swing," there's two things come to mind. One is, what does that mean? And the other is, if that's the case, how come he didn't win more than one major and a lot more tournaments? And of course, there's a million reasons for that, including injuries and putting. So, but let's take a look at the swing, and we'll see what's involved in his movement. Now, if you wanted to do this to swings that you might capture on YouTube or something, check this out. Pick something stationary and draw a vertical and a horizontal line, and then run the film and see what happens. So you'll notice that I drew the lines on that tee box marker there. You see how it moves around? So if you're drawing lines on his body at the beginning, it's not going to mean anything once he gets to the end of his swing. Now, that doesn't mean that in the middle of his swing that you couldn't mark a spot and see what kind of movement from point to point there is. So I'll show you that in a second. But the reason I'm not going to draw lines on this front view is that by the time he hits the ball, he'll be out of all those lines and it won't mean anything. Now, in the back view here, this camera is almost perfectly still. You can see I drew a line on that tree back there, and it remains pretty stationary. So, sometimes even a tripod camera will move if it's windy. So you can check it out before you start your work and just make sure you're not wasting your time. So here we've got a nice view. The camera's even situated behind his hands nicely, and it's at a good height. So this is a good one to look at. So let's take a look. And right away, I've shown you a lot of videos of guys when they take it back, you'll see their head lower immediately as they compress into the ground. Elkington doesn't really do that. In fact, there's a slight upward tick as the hands pull into the body. So you can see that the grip, it gets closer to his right leg. Watch his right knee moving almost in sync with the hands. Now the camera starts now. My guess is that he has kicked his right knee a little forward because you can see the back of his left leg here. So there was probably just a slight trigger move and then a return of the knee. So the knees get back to square about here, and the club now is already underway. So that's kind of a trigger movement, a rhythm move. From the front move with the driver, now this isn't an iron, I'll show you an iron swing, but often players, especially in the classic sense, Elkington now is coming on 50, and he grew up when rightward movement was more popular, common amongst players, especially with the driver, loading right as opposed to staying centered. I never had a problem with loading right. I think it's an athletic movement as long as it's not too large. You see here, from where he starts, he'll probably jog his head back a couple inches, and then he recovers nicely there. So you'll see as the club goes up, as the club goes inward there, it makes for some of this upwardness, but certainly nice control of the shaft. It comes up just barely outside of his hands, so certainly nothing that's getting behind him. Club face not exactly straight toe up, but pretty close, a little bit more vertical than the spine angle. So here's something that I always like to get people to do, is to make sure that when the club breaks the horizontal shaft position that it breaks above the right forearm, and you'll see that's done perfectly here. Now this is my midline point. I always draw a line here just as a checkpoint. A couple of things. What I want to see is how much space is there from the address position. That's a 57, and then we'll get up here and we get to 65. That's pretty classic, 8 degrees of elevation there. We see the elbows are perfectly level, so that's pretty cool. The left wrist is still cupped, and I would call this a neutral hand position in the chest there. It's not super deep, it's not way out in front of him, so this space here at 8 degrees is pretty common. Something a little more in and deep would have less space there, and something more where the hands would move away from the body and go out in front of him would be bigger space. The head now has sort of stabilized, and it's pretty much right on the line. It's starting to, you can see it's starting to come down. Nice wrist position here. He's maintained the cup. You'll see a lot of players, especially nowadays, it seems like it's the closed wrist position is starting to become a little more commonly seen, but we've got this here now from where we were in the midpoint. That's 4 more degrees up, and that's a fair amount of lift. So this swing is not necessarily looking to stay closed up in the armpits, again, like as becoming more popular. I'll show you later. I'll do a video on Stuart Appleby and show you how he's changed his swing over the years to a tighter, lower hand position. Now also notice the hip depth, really like that. If you look at the knees, you'll see that if anything, the right is back more so than the left forward. I also like that. Now, coming forward, you'll see that Steve's hands stay up on the middle line, and because the right forearm comes in high, so if I draw that, you'll see what I mean by that. Most of the time when you see someone do that, you'll see the forehead back away from the line a bit. Now that's going to produce a little more of a slinging type release, and the guy that does that more so than anyone is Mickelson. And VJ does that a little. Well, actually VJ is not the same. VJ's head comes back, but his hands are almost under the shaft plane. Mickelson backs up so much he actually gets the shaft on the original shaft plane and then lets go of the club with his left hand, actually. Now, but with that combination of a little backup in the forehead and the hands coming in a little bit high, what really makes this cool is the perfect hip movement. So, as I've showed you a bunch of times, you take a look at that hip action right there in the box. Now, like I said, we can't really look at this one, but what you'll see is something I also really like, is a great push off the right foot, right leg. And since the hips, you know they're back in the box, you know that that push, at least to me, is going back that way. So I really like that too. So great lateral movement. And since he plays the ball relatively forward there and also moves a little bit to the right, that gives him some room to drive. And notice how the head is still there. Now the thing has moved around a little bit, but trust me, you can see it in relation to where the impact is. There's his nose. And then more so than most, you know, Elkington would drive his hips so nicely and maintain his side tilt so much that he would appear to have somewhat of a C there. But look how flat the front part of his body is. See, that's the key to keeping the back from getting hurt when you finish. So that's great forward push. If we look at a front view. Again, none of these pictures are tripod pictures, but here's the forward movement. Just a massive push, which really, and there's the impact, perfect, and then past. You can see that the left wrist sustains there, right there. So you gotta like that. And there's that classic Elkington finish. Now, if we're wondering why I've been asked a bunch of times, why do those hands come in high like that? Well, if you look at the right arm position up here, whether or not the club is going to find the shaft plane or not is going to depend on how the right arm works. So, in this case, this arm stays bent fairly long and the elbow is driving in front, and that's going to bring the arm in a little bit more bent. If you watch someone who at this point in the swing would look more like this, where the club would be down on the shaft plane, what you would see from here is a more pronounced movement to straighten the right arm while the hand stayed lagging back. In this case, again, the combination is the head goes back and the right arm drives inward a little bit more. So I kind of view that as the right arm. I think that the arms squeeze together when they get at the top of the swing. Elkington's, his squeeze together more in the downswing portion of the movement, like right in now. And in this case, I think that the right arm has won the squeeze battle, whereas if you see someone who was squeezing the left arm into the chest and rolling the arm down, that can help effectively straighten the right. And then also there's the attempt to keep the head out over the ball and to aim the hands, if you wanted to come down in that shaft plane. I think most guys don't even try to get it there. So I've seen a lot of good players where if they just think about where their hands are going to pass by, they can actually do that. So anyway, Steve Elkington, classic swing. He's still playing great. Always rooting for the guys.